Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what had happened. I will spare the details, but it was really horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school, while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview, and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid, and I'll do what I want, and you can't stop me." When I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said, "If we were outside this building right now, I would freaking kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day we had court for the children, and my manager decided that I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague who attended told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where is that worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that the emotions are very high. You build a bit of resilience working in this field, and overall, I mainly felt relieved that those children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. But about 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out to the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close, I thought that I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car. Just for a second, and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for just a second, looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing tiny rustling noises, and whether imagined or not, all of the true crime horror stories that I've ever heard just flashed into my mind. Well, safe to say, I freaked myself out and I sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come and pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself that I was being silly, and I asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around with the headlights shining on my car, and I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night, and I called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I then took a few days off and I came back to a meeting with my manager, who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it, and it was a note that said, "You're good as dead, bitch." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I am convinced that it was the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming in, each one getting longer. They addressed me as bitch, a home wrecker, saying that I kidnap and abuse children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing them threatened to rape, torture, kill, find out where I live, and to burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say that it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I'd never had anything like this happen before. They did say that they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they had been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building, and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day, on the way home from work, I noticed that a car was following me. At first I thought that I was being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets. I doubled back onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. And even after all that, a dark green Camry was still paced a little way behind me. I freaked out, but I had already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station. I was planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beep my horn until I had someone's attention. The second that I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they come back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic, I had forgotten to get the license plate, and that upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home, and I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month, and I heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was very honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened, and it really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown, and all access to the office was restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments, and I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed down and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office, there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. And about a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family. And as for the man who I believe stalked and threatened me for just doing my job, let's not meet ever again. I never told this to anyone, but I want to hear your thoughts about this. One day, I was free from work, so I went to do some errands on foot since it would be close to home. While I was getting to the first corner intersection, I'm not really sure if that's how it's called. English is not my first language, so I do apologize for that. I noticed a red car was slowing down. I thought that it was because he was about to turn right in that corner. But while I stood there, I noticed that he was unsure on making the turn or to keep going down the road. I kinda grew impatient, so I just decided to keep walking. While crossing the street, I noticed that he changed his mind and then started following me. I was starting to feel uneasy because he was basically going at my side and at my pace, all by having his windows up, and I was all by myself, and I couldn't see anybody else coming down or up the street. I started to walk faster, and I tried not to look at him. And that's when he started to go faster too. I was pretty sure that I would be abducted at this point. I crossed another intersection, and he did it as well. I knew that I was getting closer to some businesses and a school down the street, which is usually very crowded at that time, since it was around like 1 or 2 p.m. So I was praying to God to allow me to reach there, so if he tried to do anything, at least I could scream and someone could listen. But before getting there, he decided to roll down his windows, and I saw a guy masturbating. I acted like I didn't see him, and I started to walk even faster, and until just before I reached the front of the school. He then sped up and drove off. Obviously, this guy was definitely a creep, but sometimes I think I could easily get abducted. Or not? I don't know. Let me hear what you guys think. When I was 12 years old, I got an unusual opportunity. I was able to be involved in a study abroad program where I would live in England for several months. I'm from a very small town in the US originally. The program was run through my middle school, and I went over to England with a group of around 15 other 12-year-olds. Before we went to the homes that we would be living in for the next few months, we ended up staying in London for about a week to do some sightseeing. When we get there, we were staying in a small hostel downtown, and my school had essentially rented out the entire hostel for the kids and for the adults that were chaperoning the trip. If I remember correctly, there were 2 adults with us. Every day, we would have a scheduled activity, and then we would have a significant amount of free time where we were allowed to explore the city as a group with just the kids and no adults. Well, the second day we were there, my friends and I were out together, and we ended up stopping to look at some kiosk that had some souvenirs. It was just about a block from our hostel. I was around the backside of the kiosk, and it would look like I was alone. But then I feel someone grab my arm. I turn, and I see a middle-aged man, most likely homeless, looking at me, and he says, "Hello there, pretty little girl," in the creepiest voice that I have ever heard. I immediately darted around the other side of the kiosk, back to my friends. But before I could even tell them what happened, he came around and got super close to me and said, "You can run, you can hide, but I will find you." And then he walked away. I immediately grabbed my friend and I started pulling her back towards the direction of our hostel. I was crying when we got back there, and we told our chaperones what happened. They essentially brushed it off and didn't do anything. Every day we were in London from then on, I would see him 1 to 3 times a day when we were out. He would never get close and never say anything, but he would always be smiling while watching me. Every time that I would see him, I would point him out to either of the chaperones or another kid in our group. And on the last day that we were there, we were getting ready to leave, and we were catching the train from London to Leeds. And while we were waiting at the train platform, I hear, "Bye, little girl. I will see you soon." And I turned around, and sure enough, he is there. He quickly leaves, and again, no one in my group really does anything. Except for the other kids, since they were all completely freaked out. I never saw him again after seeing him on the train platform, but I still remember his voice, and every time I think of it, I get a shiver down my spine, and I think about how close I was to danger. So this happened a long time ago, but I've never forgotten it, as it was one of the strangest encounters that me and my family has ever had. One time as a child, I went with my family to the grocery store, It was our monthly trip to stock up on groceries, so we were going to be there for a while. I was about 12 at that time, so by the age that I had a good understanding of how to read people. We went to the produce aisle, and suddenly, a strange man caught my eye. He was standing awkwardly close to us, sort of fake browsing the vegetables. But his body language seemed off. He was standing with his back to us, but something seemed strange about the way he was positioned. As we slowly moved down the aisle, he would also slowly rotate, so his back was always facing us. As we got a little closer, I could tell that he was wearing those see-behind glasses. Those gimmick sunglasses that have hidden mirrors on the inside of the lenses so you can see behind yourself. He had a dirty gray zip-up jacket on and long dark messy hair, and he had to be in his 40s. Our shopping went on, and wherever we went, I would see him standing there staring at me from across the store. He would keep his distance from us, but he was always within eyesight no matter where we were in the store. About 30 minutes in, and my mom still hadn't noticed it, but he was starting to really creep me out. My mom didn't believe me at first. Eventually, we got to the refrigerator aisles, and this is when it got weird. Whatever aisle we were in, he would quickly pace past us occasionally. At this point, he wasn't even trying to look like he was shopping, and my mom and sister were starting to notice this and also seem concerned. At one point, we were grabbing something off one of the shelves, and I could see him just standing on the opposite aisle, peeking through the shelves at us. His sunglasses were on still, but now his hood was up. We started to walk faster, and we did some random zigzags around the store to see if he really was following us, and we tried to lose him, but he would keep up, all in a very sneaky way at that. He would always be at the opposite end of the aisle, but he kept up with us the whole time. By this point, my mom was concerned, so we pushed the cart up to the customer service area to talk to the manager about it. And by this point, we lost him. We informed the manager and she was very helpful. She actually went to go find the guy and talk to him. We waited at the counter until she paced back to us with a confused look on her face. She walked up to my mother and told us, he said you're his mom." And by this point, my mom and sister were concerned. The manager rang us up and said that we should leave, and then they will escort the strange man. We walked out to the car staying close to our mother when we were met with a horrible sight. The man was just standing across the parking lot, across from our car, with his head slightly tilted and a big grin on his face. We floored it out of there, but we could still see him, just standing there, watching us leave. So whoever that guy was in sunglasses, let's not meet again. So for context, I grew up in the suburbs, and outside of the occasional play park or sports field, there was nothing to do. Me and my neighbors used to play knock and run, or its other name Ding Dong Ditch. For context, I have a sister who is a year younger than me, and my neighbor James was the same age as me. His older sister was 14 at that time, and she also played with us from time to time, although I think she just wanted to hang out with my sister, whom she thought was very cute. I was admittedly the biggest coward in the group, and to this day, my flight instinct is significantly stronger than my fight instinct, so I would never ring the doorbell, as I would always find a way to wiggle out of it. I always found watching it more entertaining than doing it. On this particular afternoon, my cousins came over. One of my cousins was my age, and the other was a few years younger than me and couldn't play with us. And the other was a year older than me. But everyone treated him like he was an adult, even though he was only 11. Or at least that's how I perceived it. Let's call this cousin Daniel, as he is somewhat important to the story. I am not a reliable narrator, as it has been almost 10 years since these events, but I will try my hardest to remember them. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. My cousins came over, and we were banished outside to play, and we all decided that knock and run was a good idea. We usually just played around our immediate street, never venturing further than the next street over, out of fear of getting lost in the copied and pasted suburban streets. We made our way up the street to the play park on the top of the hill, and it sat where a house could have been, and someone could cut across it onto the next road. As we sat on the play equipment, we decided that a vote should decide who knocked first. And of course, I was picked. I remember getting myself out of it and getting my older cousin to take my place. I am thankful that he was and is proud as he is. It did help me get out of a lot of situations. We decided that our first target would be the fanciest looking house in the area, a white marble house with a fountain in the front yard and a curved driveway. I remember sitting next to a car. I was small enough to look under it from the curb, and I had a clear view of my cousin sneaking up to the door and ringing the doorbell 3 times in order to get the attention of whoever was inside. And then he bolted down the pathway towards the street to hide behind the cars. But before he got to the fence, an older man in a black leather apron with what I assumed was paint came sprinting after him. I immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't the usual response to a knock and run. Sure, we have encountered some angry people before, but this was something very different. He practically flew down the walkway towards Daniel and threw his hand out to grab him. This didn't feel like anything someone his age could do, and it scared the shit out of me. I think I might have been the only one with a clear view of what was going on, which meant that I was the first to see what was happening. And it wasn't until the man was practically on top of Daniel that he noticed that he was being chased, and the scream that he made when he realized this will always stick with me. As I said at the start of this, Daniel was, and still a very proud person who will always try to prove himself, so hearing this scream of pure terror struck at my core. Everyone was clued in at this point as to what was happening. Daniel didn't open the waist-high gate at the end of the path. He just jumped it, which I think ultimately saved him from getting hurt, as the man had to take a second to open it, and Daniel was sprinting down the street as fast as I had ever seen him. "Stop, you little shit!" the man shouted with a deep, angry voice, which did actually stop Daniel in his tracks. They were both standing in the middle of the road at this point, reminding me of an old Western movie when 2 cowboys would be standing at either end of the main road. The man marched straight up to Daniel's face, and I could finally get a good look at him. His skin resembled rough leather, and the few strands of hair on his head had long since grayed. He was clean-shaven, and he was wearing white pants and a white button-up and a black leather apron that had what I rationalized as red paint on it. After he was maybe half a foot from Daniel, he started to berate him, and I could only make out the words, "Sick people in there!" Everything about this man threw me off, and I could see my neighbor and my other cousin who was hiding in the bushes felt the same. My neighbor's older sister, whom I will call Tay, screamed out at him from the other side of the road, which gave Daniel the opportunity to run as fast as he could away from that old man. We all ran at that point, and I don't think that I or anyone else knew where we were running off to. but I found myself in the car park of the shopping center across the road from me. I waited there for maybe 30 minutes, just watching cars come in and out, feeling safer with a large group of people. I had no idea at that time if he chased one of us or not, but I knew that I was safe. I made my way back to my house, and I found that I was the last one to return. My cousin Daniel ran straight home, and Tay followed him. My other cousin and neighbor ran around the suburbs for a bit before deciding to go home. My mom was missing when I got home, and I realized that she had been told what had happened. My mother is someone who isn't afraid of protecting her own, and she is one of the strongest people that I know. So I felt pretty safe that she was aware and was off telling him to fuck off. But when she got back, she seemed off. She didn't want to talk about it or anything, and any color from her face had completely drained. We slept at my neighbor's house that night because my mom wanted to talk to my dad about something serious, and I think we all knew what it was about. Nothing happened for a while after that. Not for a while, but my mom was a lot more protective of what we did outside. We were no longer allowed to play knock and run or go up the road without a parent. It really bugged my sister who loved to play outside, but I don't think she fully understood what happened. I have a lot more stories about this guy, and I probably will write more, because this has helped me to get a better grip on everything that happened throughout that year. But I hope you enjoy the very first event in one of the worst periods of my life. Part 2. Okay, so before I get into the next few events, I think that it's important to address some things that I've read in the last post. I know that we were the ones who originally disturbed him, but I thought that it was important to dedicate a post to that event as it kind of kicked off a lot of stuff. I will probably update this post with a few more stories just to get it all out of there. But I just wanted to say that I fully understand my and everyone else's part to play in part 1. But I believe that the issue really began after that, which is what I'll show you today, and I am sorry if I upset anyone. First things first, I promised a few of you that I would ask my mom what the old man had told her last night at dinner, and I did manage to do so. She was surprised that I remember what happened and tried to sweep it under the rug, but I kept pressing her for answers. I'm not proud of pressuring my mother into talking to me about something like this, but curiosity got the better of me. I know that that is not an excuse, but I feel that it somewhat justifies my actions, as a lot of you wanted to know as well. And after I pressed her for more answers, she grabbed my arm and led me to my room before placing me on my bed. She sat next to me and told me not to repeat anything of what she says to my sister, my cousins, or anyone else who was involved with this man throughout that year. And she finally opened up about how she was sitting at home watching TV when she heard a loud knock on the front door. It was my cousin Daniel and my neighbor Tay, who looked terrified and exhausted. After letting them in and grilling them for answers, my mom was rightfully pissed that someone had spoken to them in such an awful way, and so she got up to go and confront the man. And on her way out, my other cousin and neighbor arrived, whom she also sent inside. She was concerned about where I was, but Daniel made it clear that I ran in the opposite direction of the man and that he would go out looking for me. My mom made her way up to the play park and saw the man pacing back and forth up and down his driveway. He didn't seem angry or upset. He apparently didn't seem like anything besides someone marching back and forth, which took my mother's mood from enraged to confused. She walked up to the front gate and let herself in, which made the man stop almost immediately and stare at her. I am surprised that she didn't turn back and go home at that point, because that's what I would imagine anyone would have done. But as I said in part 1, I am a coward. The man marched up to my mom and started to berate her about trespassing on his property, which she met by berating him about terrifying some kids. This apparently went on for a couple of minutes before he said something that terrified her. My mom didn't say exactly what he said because she said that she was trying to forget it, but he said something along the lines of, "I will show both of you what it feels like to have somebody on your property when you don't want them there, and then I'll shut those fucking kids up forever." He tried to grab her at that point, but she quickly moved away and left his yard, and then swiftly went back home. This really affected my mom, but that was the answer I got from her. I gave her a hug, and I apologized for pressing her to tell me, and then we got back to dinner shortly after. I don't regret her telling me, but it just feels like knowing the end of a movie and seeing all of the hints leading up to it. It had been about a month, maybe a month and a half, since the first initial incident with the man. We hadn't seen him since, and I was forgetting about it until I went to the shops one day. For context, my parents had started to let me go to the shops by myself to grab little things for them. I was young at that time, and the shops were across the road from me, so getting there wasn't an issue. One day, my dad asked me to go and grab a loaf of bread for him. He gave me $2 coins and then sent me on my way to the shop. I was getting used to doing this on my own, and I was enjoying my independence. I grabbed the bread, which was on the far side of the large supermarket, and made my way towards the registers. I stopped by the toy aisle, and I took a look at the low-quality mass-produced action figures that I desperately wanted. This was really part of my routine even now. If I wanted something, but I didn't have money to get it, I would just look at it. But on this occasion, I wish that I had just continued to the registers. I felt 2 hands push me to the ground from my left. I was shocked for a moment as I didn't fully know what just happened. The sticky and dusty floor beneath me hurt, and it took me a second to look at my attacker. And when I did, I immediately knew that this was very wrong. It was the old man from up the road. He had found me in the place that I had hid from him just a month prior. He started to shout at me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I don't know if it was the adrenaline ringing in my ears or his rage just taking over, but the tone in which he was shouting shook me. I tried to get up to run, and when I planted my foot on the ground to get up, he kicked it out from below me, which made me fall back on the ground. Thank God a staff member arrived at this point, and they must have heard his shouting from across the store and came to check on what was happening. I didn't get a good look at the staff member, but I am thankful for them. As I got up to run with a loaf of bread in my hand, I could hear the man reacting to me getting away, and it took everything in me not to look behind me to look at him. But I knew that he was furious. I ran straight out of the store with the bread without realizing it, and I almost threw up from all my emotions. I told my parents when I got home, and they both made it very clear that I wouldn't be going to any shopping trips by myself from here on out. They didn't think about how me and my sister walked together to school, which, in hindsight, should have been something that they thought of. The trip to my school wasn't a long one. It was just over 1 kilometer long, or just over half a mile, but the trip was still tough on small legs. There were quite a few hills which added time to our trip there, and the path went along a creek with nothing around it. It was nice and isolated, which helped relax my mind after school. But not long after the supermarket incident, me and my sister were walking home from school and just made our way to the beginning of the path along the creek when we saw an SUV that had been parked there for what I assumed had been a while. I thought that it was empty, but as you could probably guess, it wasn't. We turned to enter the creek when the SUV car door opened, and we heard someone shouting to us, "Hey, do you guys want to drive home?" It was the man. My sister, who was always trusting of others, started to walk toward the truck, but I quickly held her back. "What's wrong?" the man said in a cheerful tone. This was very different from the unintelligible screaming from just the week before, and I obviously wanted nothing to do with this man. I quickly started to lead my sister towards the creek, and the man quickly scooted over towards the door and said, "Wait up, I will walk you home." I should have just run up the hill towards the school, but instead, I started to sprint down the creek. Looking back at this, I feel stupid. Daniel was faster than me, and the man had been able to catch up to him in seconds, but for some reason, he didn't leave his truck. All I heard was another unintelligible scream and his truck driving away. My sister was beyond pissed that we didn't get a ride home and that we had to walk, but I didn't care. She and I were safe, and so we continued walking along the path. Thinking back to it, the path was beautiful and connected on either side to small, quiet streets, the perfect in-between of isolation. Sadly, my young mind didn't realize that the creek opened to two quiet streets, and so when I saw that same silver SUV on the street at the end of the path, I froze. What could I have done? I felt powerless, and I had to take care of my sister, who was only now figuring out that this man may not have good intentions. I decided that the best course of action was to cross the creek and walk through the bushes to the other side. This was beyond a dangerous idea, as there were slippery rocks, animals, and running water. This very easily could have injured or killed us, but somehow we managed it. We climbed over logs of wood and under tree branches through prickly bushes and through large plants, but we managed to do it and crossed over to another road that we followed towards the main road, which eventually took us home. Obviously, those two SUVs could have been different, but at that time, I was certain that they were the same. And even now, I am not 100% sure if they were different. I only found about this later, but my parents got the police involved at this point. But based on the fact that more stuff happened, I'm going to say that they probably didn't do much. There were a few other things that happened throughout this time, like mail being stolen, our bins being pushed over, and the front door knocking at the early hours of the morning. We knew was him, although we had no real proof. The last thing that I will bring up before I end this post is something that I am not 100% sure was a dream or not. For context, my dad used to have campouts with me and my sister, where we would sleep out on the couch, and my dad would sleep on the mattress on the floor. The couches we would sleep on was right next to the front door in the living room, and we would watch movies with pizza or some other type of takeaway. It was really fun, and I remember those nights. But one particular night will stick with me. Everyone else went to sleep, and Naruto was on. I hadn't watched the red Naruto at that point, but I recognized the characters. I was sitting directly next to the large window that looked out onto the driveway. I was enjoying doing nothing when I saw some movement out on the driveway, and so I looked out. And there he was. He was walking to our front door, wearing his white pants and a white button-up t-shirt. He was staring directly at our front door with such focus that it felt like nothing would break it. But something did, and it was me. He looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that it was funny to him. He simply held his hand up, waved at me, and then placed one finger on his mouth as if he were telling me to shush, and then he jogged away. I surprisingly fell asleep not long after, and for the longest time, I thought that it was a dream until I read all of Naruto and recognized the scene. It was then that I realized that it might not actually have been a dream, and that he might have been attempting something. And after what my mom had told me, I think I know what he was trying to do. Part 3. So, it's been a while since I've given you guys an update. I've been really busy with school, and digging up these memories is a little distracting for me. I would like to thank you all for all the incredibly positive responses to my post. It makes me feel better about all of this. But without further ado, let's just start the story. It was summer, and the local council decided to have a fair. The local council hired a few clowns, some face painting stations, food trucks, and bouncy castles at the local football field. Of course, me and my sister were beyond excited to go. For a young child, this was the hottest ticket in town, and my parents were happy to take us as it was just down the road and for free. I remember the field being beyond busy, and the crowd was difficult to walk in and even harder to see through. But we managed to find ourselves right next to a giant blow-up bouncy slide. As it was summer, the actual balloon of the slide burned to the touch, and the sun made me feel like I was slowly melting. But regardless of this, I must have spent at least 40 minutes going up and down that slide. I was having too much fun, and I didn't notice that both my parents and sister had gone missing in the giant crowd of people. I got down from the slide, put my shoes and socks back on, and I started to make my way through the crowd. I didn't actually know where I was going, and I remember feeling incredibly anxious as I waddled around the fair. It wasn't until I felt a hand on my shoulder and then on my forearm that I felt a little safer. It was my dad, I thought. He had found me. I couldn't actually tell whose arm it was, as the angle at which it was holding my arm made it difficult to look out in the crowd. The whole day was overly stimulating, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I should have known from how hard the hand was gripping me, or the fact that it was leading me to the parking lot, that something was wrong. I only really felt terror when I saw my parents running towards me, running faster than I have ever seen them run. Adrenaline immediately coursed through my veins, and I pivoted my body around, and I immediately saw the leathery hand on my arm in the white pants. The link was connected in my mind as to who this was, and my mother's scream was the first thing that I heard, and the angry or annoyed grunt of the old man followed it. He started to jog with me towards his truck, but I had started to fight back against his grip. He may have been old, but he was stronger than any elderly person should be, and he was faster too. Everything about this man was wrong, and it may have been my young mind making it all up, but I still believe that something was very weird about him. No elderly person should be like this. At this point, I was only a couple of feet away from his car, and as he opened the door, I felt two hands on my right arm that pulled me hard against the man's grip. The man's grip held on before my dad came out from behind me and slammed the old man's head into his car, which loosened his grip on me. At this point, my mother grabbed me and ran, and then we went straight home. Apparently, they didn't notice me slip away on the bouncy slide, and they ran into some family friends who offered to take care of my sister while they searched for me. I don't know what type of person it takes to do something like that in such a populated area, but this man was not normal, not in the slightest. My dad returned later that night, and he looked really roughed up and drained of all energy. From what I had gathered over the years, they got into a pretty brutal fight that ended with the police breaking it up. My dad didn't get into that much trouble, considering that he had called the police on the man before. but they still took him to the station to give a statement. When he sat down on the couch, he looked exhausted, bruises forming all over, and a cut on his lip and upper eyebrow still leaking blood. But he had a smile on his face, and I could hear him telling my mom that it was over. They were both hopeful, and so was I. A couple weeks later, my cousins came back over, and Daniel wanted to know everything. He felt like he was the main victim and deserved to know everything because he was the one that the man shouted at and the one that the man wanted to get the most. I don't disagree that the man would probably try to hurt him on sight, but it felt weird to me, almost like he was trying to take credit for something that to him sounded like a creepy story, but to my family was real. Anyway, we decided to go out for a bit. My parents trusted us because we were with my older cousin. We went up to the usual play park, which was across the street from the man's currently vacant house. Daniel was telling us all about how he swore that he saw him near his house. Keep in mind that he lives almost 3 hours away. I'm not saying that he's a liar, but I am saying that he wanted to be part of this. Anyway, we were playing hide and seek, and Tay, our neighbor, was seeking. She had only started to count down from 60, and I always tagged along with Daniel because he always found the best spots. We ran across the road towards the man's house, and Daniel jumped the fence, which I immediately stopped at. "Come on," he said from the other side of the waist-high fence. "No one will find us." The house felt like a void that we would get sucked into, and I had, up until this point, refused to even be near it. But for some reason, I agreed. I joined him in the man's yard, and to my shock, Daniel wanted to go deeper into his home, not just his yard, and I made it clear that this was a very bad idea. Even if he was in custody jail or whatever, we would be breaking into someone's home. Daniel didn't seem scared by it though. I think the whole idea of being in the man's house seemed too attractive to him, and we went around the side fence into his backyard. It was overgrown, almost like no one had been living there for years. I made my way towards his back window and I looked inside. From what I could make out, he was a hardcore minimalist, only having a TV, chair, fireplace, and a shelf that housed some photos of a much younger man and some medals. He was a veteran. It changes nothing to me, but it explains his above-average speed and strength, especially for his age. The sound of a door sliding open almost made me yell in fear. Daniel had found an unlocked sliding door and wanted to venture inward. I ran around to find him, but he was already inside before I could stop him. At this point, I was also curious to find out more, but I understood the risk of this all. But it didn't matter if I understood it, because I went in with him. The rest of the house reflected the living room. The kitchen had a fridge and a stove, and the dining room only had a small table with one wooden chair. There was no decoration on the walls or signs of life besides these sad reminders of how lonely the man had been. As I said, this changes nothing for me. I hate this man more than anyone can know. We made our way upstairs and found 2 completely empty rooms in one bedroom. A single bed with a bedside table filled with different types of weapons. A hatchet, a knife, and a knuckle duster. I had never seen a knuckle duster before, and I successfully fought the urge to take it and put it on. This was something that Daniel failed to do so, as he almost immediately grabbed it, which I almost hit him for. We continued searching the house, and Daniel had the idea that he must have something weird in his wardrobe. And when we opened it, he gave a disappointed sigh, as there was nothing inside except a few white button-ups and white pants. This especially creeped me out, as he never wore anything else. We made our way back down the stairs and into the living room, and to our surprise, we missed the table that sat next to the couch. It was just out of view and only had one drawer. Daniel opened it and struggled to get it out fast, but when he did, we found something profoundly strange. It was a single photo. Neither of us could make out what it was, but we knew that it looked familiar. Daniel sat down in the chairboard, and it was only then that we heard Tay scream out that she had given up. Daniel shot up and sprinted back out the backyard. We had both completely forgotten about her. But as I put the photo back into the drawer, something stood out to me about the photo. The fence was navy blue. This was something unusual in my area. I only knew of one navy blue fence in the suburb, our side door entrance fence. This realization made the photo seem so much clearer. The white pebbles on the ground leading to the backyard, the cream color of the garage next to it, and the green bush at the end of the path. This was my home. He had a photo of my home. I quickly met back up with Daniel and Tay, and then we went back home. I should have told my parents, but I was scared that I would be in trouble if they found out that we were in his home. And I understand why we would be, but I still didn't want to live up to it. About a month after that, we were having another campout with me, my dad, and my sister. Both my sister and my dad had fallen asleep while the TV was still on, illuminating the room. It was one of those weird situations where you're both really comfortable and really uncomfortable. Well, that was my situation. And on most nights, I love this feeling, but that feeling will always be tied to this night. I was drifting off to sleep as well, but I heard the sliding back door open slowly. I peered up above the couch, and I saw a silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. I froze with fear, and I started to cry. My dad woke up at this point, and I'm not entirely sure how. Maybe it was a parental instinct, but he knew almost immediately that something was wrong. He got off the bed and crouched towards the dining room, which is where the back door was. The other man had begun to walk slowly through the house at this point, murmuring to himself. To my horror, I recognized the pants, the bright white pants. So many questions went through my mind, and the most prevalent one being how he was in custody. But none of that mattered because there he was, standing in my dining room, holding something. My dad charged him from around the corner and tackled him into the wall. The old man punched him in the arm, and my dad immediately dropped that arm. It was the knuckle dusters that Daniel was wearing. It was at this point that the lights turned on, and I don't know if it was my dad or the man, but they came on, and my dad made a noise of pure horror. Both men were fully healed from their last fight, but my dad took a real beating. I had always expected that the old man had his ass kicked, but now I'm not so sure. My dad was standing in the doorway to the living room, shielding us with his body, and my sister was awake and crying at this time, as was I. And my mom also ran down the stairs and immediately saw everything that was going on. The man had lunged at my dad with a thing in his hand that I could see was a hatchet. My dad threw himself to the side, and his other arm got grazed by the hatchet, drawing blood. My mom at this point leapt towards the old man and pushed him into the kitchen bench, which made him scream. But he was up almost as fast as he was down. He slashed at my mom and missed her, and my dad ran to the other room and started to call the police. My mom was dodging his slashes while also throwing things at him, and once she got to the knife block, she armed herself with 2 knives and threw one of them, and the handle hit him in the face, knocking him back, and my mom took the opportunity and drove the knife into his shoulder. This made him scream again. He fell to the ground and didn't try to get up until the police arrived. After this happened, we moved, not too far away, maybe just half an hour away. And even though we live so close to that place, we have never returned. As much as I have been tempted to go back and relive some stuff, for the time being, I am pretty comfortable staying here. Apparently, he paid bail and was staying in the hospital for a while before staying at somebody else's house. I know that he made his way back to his house before making his way to my home. It creeps me out to think that I could have been in his home at the same time as him. Well, anyway, it's been 10 years, and it's been something that has been on my mind for a while. I want to thank you all for hearing my story, and I think that it's tradition on this subreddit to say this, but to the old freaking creep up the road who terrorized my family, let's not meet again. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.